Hello everyone, welcome to day 25 of our 30 days of watercolor flowers. Today we are painting sunflowers. Sunflowers are so beautiful, they can be small or they can be really massive, but their centers are always more proportionately larger than the petals. So really large center and then small petals going around. Typically the petals are yellow to orange in color, sometimes a little bit red, and the petals are a lot smaller than, say, a daisy type flower and a lot more bunched together. So lots of petals, lots of layers, large centers, and beautiful bright yellow petals. For the greenery, there's usually a pretty large green attachment that goes up onto the sunflower where the stem and the flower is meeting. There's also a couple of leaves called the sepal right at that base as well, and then a long, pretty straight stem, but rather thick stem for a flower. And the leaves are rather large as well, with a little bit of texture, and they're usually found around the center of the stem. I am picking up some of my light yellow, my darker gamboge yellow, and some of my yellow ochre to make a yellow mixture for the petals. We are going to start with the petals first, and if you've seen some of my other flower tutorials, you'll know that when we have big centered flowers, we usually start with the centers, but you'll see why in a few minutes why we chose to start with the petals first. So when we're painting sunflowers, the petals are short and the centers are large. So I'm painting these short strokes in this really light yellow color because we always start with our lightest color first in watercolor. Because it's a sunflower and the petals are more bunched together and less separate than, say, a daisy flower, I'm letting some of the strokes be kind of doubled up and blended together, with a few strokes having some white space between them to give some distinction between some of the petals. Make sure when you're doing the forward-facing flowers that the center is really large and open. Now for this flower over here, we are painting some petals going upward in the front and then some petals on the back also going upward. Now we're keeping in mind that large center, but as you can see, some of our petals from the front are overlapping where the center is going to be, and that's why I wanted to paint the flower petals first. So it's just keeping those strokes really short no matter what direction and what style the flower is, and then maintaining visually in your mind. It's kind of negative painting. You're maintaining where that center is and you're painting around it. So it kind of ends up looking like you have painted a bright white center by just painting around it. The flower petals on this third flower are also pointing up around the front, covering up the center just a bit, but it's just a little bit harder to tell because it's not as dramatic. Now, while these petals are still wet, I am picking up some yellow ochre and I am just dotting this color kind of very textural around the edges of where the flower petals are meeting the center. I'm also adding some of this color to the bottom where the flower is going to meet the greenery, just right here on this one. The reason I want it a little bit textural is because this is where we're going to add the center, so it doesn't need to be smooth or precise. We just want to dab that color in to get a little bit of a bleed while it's still wet and start to create some of that texture that we're going to continue to add in for the center. We're going to let all of that dry while we work on the greenery. So I'm going to be mixing sap green and yellow ochre together to get the green color to use for the greenery. And that's my favorite color mix for greenery in general. And we are going to start with the stems. This one I'm doing pretty straight. If you see sunflowers, they are pretty straight, even though they're super tall. So I wanted to have one that was a little bit straight. And then I'm going into my 2-stroke method for the leaves. Really light pressure for the stem. Starting with light pressure on the tip of your brush, you're going to push down on the body of your brush to create the shape and the length of your leaf. And then you're going to lift up at the end to create the tip of the leaf. Do it on the other side and leave white space in the middle for a vein. I'm also picking up some more sap green in a darker concentrated pigment while it's still wet and just adding a tiny bit of that color towards the base of the leaf and some areas on the stem. This gives a nice bleeding effect, and we get a light tone and a mid tone in that first wash, which is a nice look. And then these two flowers at the top, we can see where the stem is meeting the flower. So we want to add some of that really kind of chunky greenery that is at the base of the sunflower. I added a bit of a curve to the stems of these other two flowers to give more movement to the piece, and then continue to add a few more leaves to balance everything out. So when you have a really heavy leaf on the right side, you can balance that out by having another heavy leaf on the left side, and then fill in those awkward gaps by doing smaller, daintier leaves to continue that balancing act. As my light tones and my mid tones in my greenery starts to dry, I can go back in with some even stronger concentration of sap green and add my even darker tones. So I always try to aim for light tones, mid tones, dark tones, because with watercolor, your paintings can look really flat because it all ends up drying kind of flat. So once everything starts to dry, we can add in some of the harsh lines for even more detail. I also like to add bits of greenery along the stem to create a little bit more texture. Now I'm rinsing my brush really well so I can pick up some more yellow ochre and it won't turn green. And I'm going to mix that yellow ochre with some brown I already have on my palette, and also mix some burnt umber in there as well because we're going to add in the brown for the center. So this is in a mid-tone wash and we are dotting it around the center. We want to make sure we leave some white space so that we can see the texture. We also want to leave more white space towards the right or wherever you want to put a highlight, because we want some white peeking through to give the idea that there is highlight and maybe the sun is shining down from the right side on these flowers. So I'm doing the same thing on this flower. I am dotting it in around the flower petals while leaving more white space between the dots on the right side, upper right side, where the sun would be shining down on that flower. And again, the same on this one, dotting it around, not hitting the petals that are covering the center, and leaving more white space on the right side. While the centers are still wet, we are picking up some burnt umber straight from the palette and dotting that in a very high concentration. It almost looks black. And we are going to let that blend and bleed, leaving the right side a little bit lighter, so not putting quite as many dots over there. And now to really amp up that contrasting color, I'm picking up some black straight from my palette. So that means it's really highly concentrated with less water. And we are going to dab a little bit goes a long way, just mostly focused on that left side where most of the shadow is going to be on our center. All right, now we just need to finish off our flower petals, add some more texture and contrast there because sunflowers are pretty layered. There's lots of petals. We are picking up more of our mid-tone yellow, that gamboge color, and we are going to layer some random petals over the top of the petals we've already created. So a little bit goes a long way for this too. We don't want it to be completely overtaking those back petals. We just want a hint of layering so that it looks like the petals are layered, but also gives this really nice depth and contrast to the petals that we already have. Make sure this layered color is coming in the same direction and starting from the same point as your original petals. So these petals that are layered across the front of these centers that are half shown, we want to make sure the layered petals that we're painting now are coming from the bottom as well, not quite reaching the top, so that we can see some of that highlighted color and the mid-tone color as well, and that they're going the same direction. And with those details finished, our sunflowers are done. So now we get to add it to our watercolor flower guide. I can't believe we are already on the day 25 spot. And I just think sunflowers are so classic. I had to include them. And there was some issues with my camera, so this filming is a little bit wonky, but I really appreciate you being here with me today while we painted sunflowers. I will see you all tomorrow for day 26. Bye.